Welcome to Stop My Crisis. I'm your host, Vivian Gaspar. Let's face it, even though most people, their crisis is related to money, however, I've been hearing from so many people writing into the show that their lives have just become so empty and so lonely that they truly believe their crisis is not being able to find a mate. So sometimes I believe that that could be an entire paradigm shift within themselves. And even though this is something that usually people don't think of a crisis, let's face it, it's easier to make your bills when there's two people. Life is just easier, happier, and more palatable, just better on how to overcome other type of crises when you do it as a team with someone who cares about you and you can care about them. But I know so many people struggling. Let's face it, in the age of the internet, online dating, people are just afraid to approach one another any longer. I have male friends who just don't even know what to do because they're afraid of online dating, and they think that every time they approach a woman, they'll be called a predator. So I want to know, what is the answer nowadays? I brought in a fantastic new guest, Michelle Nagel. Author Michelle Nagel is actually America's #1 resilience expert. And let's face it, after 2 failed marriages, she knows what resilience is. She felt about all the same as a lot of women do, that all good men were taken. I think that's a negative misnomer. And knowing that she had a lot of emotional baggage to deal with, as well as 3 children to raise, she took a sabbatical from relationships altogether. I think a lot of us have done that, and maybe our sabbaticals are getting too long. And she worked on her own emotional health. Happy at last, she finally was fortunate to come and meet her permanent new life partner. Actually hasn't been that new, it's been over 20 years. Michelle, come educate our viewers as to what they could do, because I think so many people are dragged down by this, that it's affected every part of their life, and now they're laden with crises. I meet people like this all the time. Michelle, tell me, how many people are truly single over age 18 in the United States?
In the United States, there are 107 million single people over the age of 18.
Wait a second. I thought our population was 360 million or so in the United States. Maybe 380. So you're saying a third equivalent of the population is single?
Yes.
That sounds quite lonely.
It does sound
lonely,
lonely,
contributing
doesn't
to financial crisis if they're trying to make all their bills by themselves.
I don't know how some people can afford to pay rent without somebody else to help them along.
Especially in some of our more expensive parts of the country, like the parts we're in now. It's really challenging. And so I want to know, what are the reasons, if you find someone you're dating and that perhaps the other party is less interested and willing to commit, because then it's really challenging to make that relationship more permanent. What are some of the reasons someone's afraid to commit?
Many times people don't want to make a commitment because perhaps they come from a divorce home. If their parents divorced or were never married, then they see how much struggle that their parent went through, and they don't want to repeat that. They don't want to take the risk of having another generation have to go through what they had to go through. And so another reason also that they find that they're really reluctant to make that commitment is perhaps they are somebody who wants to play the field. And if you don't have that understanding between each other. I had a friend recently who just said that the guy she thought was her one and only was dating multiple women all at the same time because they'd never had that conversation.
But wouldn't you notice if the person you're really interested in was dating many other people, or even 1 or 2 other people, if they're not emotionally or physically available to you a lot?
You would think so. This was a long distance relationship. They lived in 2 separate cities, and so she didn't see him all the time, so she didn't know what he was doing. But he wanted to have, all the benefits, of course.
Of course!
But he didn't want to make that commitment. So if a person has already had a failed relationship, they've already been through all the pain and anguish of perhaps a divorce, they don't want to go through that again.
That's very understandable. Can you just give us 5 tips for someone to find Mr. or Ms. Right?
The first thing that you should do in order to find Mr. or Miss Right is to be Mr. or Miss Right.
Fix ourselves first
Yes.
so we're attractive for the other person.
Well, it's interesting because you will find that you will attract a different flavor of person when you've got your own stuff together. It was when I reduced all of my baggage, and I had a lot, that I ran into my husband, and I was even upset because it's like, my life, I like my life. You're inconvenient. So,
Did he have to convince you?
he did. He had to work a little hard to convince me that he was not that inconvenient. So, but the most important thing that you can do, in addition to clearing out your own baggage, is to accept 100% responsibility for your life. That means you stop blaming and complaining and, oh, I'm single. You know, nobody wants to listen to you whining.
Right.
Just stop doing that and say, from this moment on, I'm going to accept 100% responsibility for my life, and I'm going to be responsible for my own happiness. It does not hinge upon Mr. or Miss Right.
Accept yourself completely.
Yes.
Is there any last tips you can get? Because so many people I know are in this predicament. They can't, especially, how about for single parents? I know I just have a new person that I'm working with that I just met recently, a single dad of kids, and he's completely fed up, but yet his life would be made easier with a partner. And he knows it, but he's like, I want nothing to do with it. And he's actually someone who was actually introduced to me by a business partner, and it's become more and more rampant, I think. You know, he actually drives a car service for a living, and he says, oh, I don't have time, but yet I want to make the time. And he seems a little conflicted. Anything that's a particularly good tip for a single parent?
Don't give up. That's probably the most important thing.
I think, wait a second, aren't you a resilience expert? I think that ties in somewhere.
So, yes, so find somebody. If you find that, look back at your life. If you've got all that baggage, then hire an expert that can help you clear out the baggage so that you become the person that you want to marry, somebody like you. So make a list of the most important things, the absolute must-haves that you will not take any kind of compromise on. I must have this in a partner. And then make a list of the, I would like to have this. Those you can fudge on. Don't fudge on the must-haves, because you cannot change anybody else. You can only change yourself.
People need to remember that more. Michelle, thank you so much for this great information. And remember, life is easier with a partner. Don't just be satisfied, because if you're struggling in any aspect of your life, think about that. You might be fed up, but don't give up hope. And remember, the better person you are, especially on the inside, the more attractive you are to someone else. It's not just about your looks, because however old you are now, looks can always fade. A car accident can happen. You turn 20 years older. It's what's inside that someone's really going to care about. That's all for now. Remember, that will stop your crisis.